This morning, we want to continue with our series that we began 2 Sundays ago. Does anyone remember the topic that we've been studying Sunday mornings? Yeah, humility toward God. And what did we call it? There's 2 types of humility. Or the humility toward God, how did we describe that? That's right. Our vertical humility is our humility toward God. And that's what we've been studying up until this point. And last Sunday we finished looking at this vertical humility. And we examined how humility toward God means putting Him at the center of our lives, which requires us to really dethrone ourselves. Take ourselves off of the throne of our hearts and allow God to reign there. Because if we think that we're ruling our hearts, in reality, it is Satan. But we need to dethrone ourselves, and by doing so, dethrone Satan as well, and give the throne over to God. Only then will He accept His throne in our hearts. And if God is the ruler of our hearts, then it just makes sense that He receives all honor and glory and praise for the things that He does through our lives, especially through the gifts that He's entrusted us with, our talents, our opportunities. He wants to use all of these things. He's given us all of these things for a reason, and that is to glorify Himself and to further His kingdom. And as I mentioned earlier in this series, our vertical humility really lays the foundation for our horizontal humility. In other words, the way we treat God, the way we are toward God, will determine the way we are toward people. If we respect God and honor Him and humbly serve Him, then we recognize that people are made in the image of God, and we will treat others with that in mind as well. The way we treat God determines the way we treat people. Adam Clarke writes, "Every man whose heart is full of the love of God is full of humility. For there is no man so humble as he whose heart is cleansed from all sin." In other words, a heart full of God and His love has no room for self. Likewise, our humility toward others is rooted in our love for them. The study of humility can in many ways be paralleled with the study on love. After all, the greatest commandments are to love God above all and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And if we truly love God above all and our neighbor as ourselves, then being humble or humbly serving them won't come very difficult for us. It will be a natural thing that comes out of our hearts. In our reading that was read for us from Romans chapter 12, verse 10, we read the following: "Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love and honor, giving preference to one another." So this morning we'll look at 2 main points taken from the verses that were read for us. And the first point is this: that a humble heart does not seek its own, but rather gives preference to others. And in order to know what it means to give preference to others, we first need to know what it means to be a self-seeker. Now, someone who looks after their own interest or their own best interest is called a self-seeker. Now, some people would say, you need to look out for yourself. Always look out for yourself, and then you'll get by in life. Well, that's a philosophy and principle that the world tries to instill within our hearts. But a self-seeking attitude actually doesn't come from God. It doesn't. God gave everything to save us. And if we know that, then as children of God, we should have the same attitude. James actually tells us where a self-seeking attitude comes from in James chapter 3, verses 15 and 16. He says, "This wisdom does not descend from above, but it is earthly, it is sensual, it is demonic. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there." In other words, every evil thing, almost all sins, can be rooted back to self-seeking. Have we ever thought of that before? When we think of all the evil that exists in the world today, It's astounding how much of it comes from a self-seeking attitude. For example, I'd like to share some examples with us. All the lies that are spread because people want to protect their own reputation. And one lie leads to a second lie, leads to a third lie. And all because we're proud and we want to cover our reputations. Or think of all the crimes that are committed in our society by countless people who neglect to see how their actions hurt the lives of their victims. You know, in our day and age, robbery and theft are glorified. With the movies that people watch, with the shows that they watch, you know, if people think they can get away with it, all they're doing is just robbing the rich anyhow. It doesn't really matter. And in reality, you know, theft hurts so many people. And it all comes from self-seeking. And I had to think of unhappy marriages. There are so many unhappy marriages. Where do unhappy marriages come from? Satan, and self-seeking. Where one spouse, you know, highlights their needs that aren't being met in the relationship and then says, well, maybe they'll end a relationship or maybe allow for a relationship even to end in divorce because they want these needs met and they'll find somebody else to meet these needs. And it is a self-seeking thing. When we get married, each spouse has needs. It's how we are. And within a marriage, the husband and wife are to look out for the needs of one another and put the other first. Now, some marriages end in divorce, but there's a lot of marriages out there that stay together but are super unhappy. Are unhappy marriages something that God rejoices over? No. You know, there's so many marriages that are struggling, and often it comes back to this: self-seeking. Or think of the vast majority of abortions that are committed and carried out because people think they can do whatever they want with their own bodies. It's their bodies, is the chant and cry of the left today. And yet, whose body is it that's ripped out of these young moms often? It's not their body. It's the body and the life of the unborn child. But the needs of the mother or the wants of the mother come first. Self-seeking. Paul was right. Where self-seeking exists, every evil thing is there. And yet, we need to ask ourselves, and one author poses these questions: is there a tendency in us to seek after our own interests before the interests of others? Do we give preference to others? Are we selfishly ambitious for the appreciation of man, even if it requires tearing others down? Are we willing to listen to others talk rather than feeling the need to always express our own opinions on every single matter? There's a lot of people that just like to hear their own voice, and so they talk and talk and talk and never have a moment to listen. And yet the common expression says God gave us 2 ears for a purpose, right? To listen twice as often as we speak. Does it bother us when others are honored more than we are? Does it bother us when others are honored for something that we've done? I'd like to share an example of what I mean here. There was a certain lecturer and writer who noticed that one of his former students had published a book that contained not only his thoughts, but his word-for-word lecture outline. He recognized it to be his work. And initially, he became so angry and furious at this former student. He sat down, he wrote him a very serious letter of condemnation, ripping him apart for his obvious disregard of Christian values and ethics. He put his heated thoughts to paper, and he fully intended on sending this former student his letter. But then his wife deterred him, that he ought not to do that. Instead, he brought his issue before the Lord, and after praying about it, he realized that what bothered him more than having been robbed by his former student was the idea that he wasn't going to get the praise and honor for the thoughts that he had put together. It was an issue of pride. It was an issue of self-seeking. I mean, those thoughts did belong to him, and yet, because he did not keep them in check, he was willing to almost ruin the life of a former student because of it. I know of another person who wrote an article for a publication, and when it came out, somebody else's name was there as the author. And so this person, he spoke with the editor, and he kind of wanted an explanation, and he said it in a nice way, and it was a big misunderstanding. It was a typo. That's all it was. And because he addressed this in a way that was gentle, the two brothers were able to deal with the situation and look past it. How easy it would have been for that person to become enraged and heated over this matter and ruined a relationship. It's so easy. Self-seeking destroys. Self-seeking never builds up. It never makes a relationship stronger. It always causes division. Because if everybody's looking after only for themselves, relationships will be ruined. Isn't that the case? Has anybody built a relationship through self-seeking? I've yet to find a person. Self-seeking is destructive. An author by the name of Peter Wagner writes on the subject of humility, "The humble man can praise God when others are preferred and blessed before them. He can bear to hear others praised and himself forgotten, because in God's presence he has learned to say with Paul, 'I am nothing.' It is through Jesus Christ that we have worth in the eyes of God. Jesus saves our soul, and a soul that is saved by Jesus is worth everything to the Lord." Now, the opposite of being a self-seeker is giving preference to others. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 31 through to chapter 11, verse 1, Paul says, "Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God." He says, "Then give no offense either to the Jews or to the Greeks or to the church of God, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved." And then he says, "Imitate me just as I also imitate Christ." So Paul was aware of certain believers in Corinth and how they used their liberty in Christ freely without considering how their actions might be a stumbling block for other Christians who were not as mature in their faith as they were. For example, the statement is made that some were eating meat that perhaps was part of idol worship. And these brothers, they ate this meat with a clear conscience because they knew there is only one God and everything belongs to him. And so they had this liberty of conscience, and so they could eat this meat even if it was offered to idols because they really weren't bothered by that. They knew there is only one God, all things belong to him, so why not eat it? Paul understood their reasoning, and he actually commends their strong faith, but he rebuked them for being inconsiderate of the consciences of weaker Christians who saw them do this. Now, after hearing this example, do we agree with the way Paul addressed this issue? Or are we of the opinion that all Christians ought to be able to live as they please as long as they have a clear conscience before God, even if other Christians might stumble at our example? There's a lot that say this, right? There's so many people that say we have freedom in Christ, and now I can do this, and now I can do this. Really, that attitude, if you take it to the extreme, can lead to self-seeking. I don't care if you're a new Christian and you are hurt by my actions or offended by my actions. I have liberty in Christ. Paul also says in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, "Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others." Loved ones, do we consider others and their needs before our own? Paul doesn't say treat others like you would be treated or want to be treated. He actually goes one step further, and he says, put the needs of others before our own. before our own. This whole topic of humility makes me think of somebody from the Old Testament. It's interesting, in Numbers chapter 12, verse 3, the Bible talks of a man who is described as being more humble than anyone else. Do we know the person that I'm referring to? I saw some lips move, and they looked accurate. So if you know the answer, just a little bit louder. Moses. Numbers chapter 12, verse 3 says that Moses was a very humble man, more than all men who are on the face of the earth. And we can assume it meant during that time. That's a big statement. And his humility is especially seen in his willingness to give preference to others. And that means putting the needs of others before his own. Moses had an upbringing to the equivalent of an Egyptian prince. He was raised in Pharaoh's palace. He was seen as the daughter, or the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And it's an incredible thing that Hebrews 11 verses 24 and 25 says. It says, "Yet he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin." He chose rather to put the needs of his people before himself. He forsook the Egyptian palace and that royal lifestyle so that he could suffer with the people of God. And this is why, loved ones, Scripture calls him more humble than all the others who lived during his day. Then, as leader of God's people, the Israelites in the wilderness, he often interceded for the Israelites before God to prevent them from being destroyed from the wrath of God because of their rebellious acts. On one occasion in particular, God threatened to destroy the Israelites because of their idol worship, and God threatened to make out of Moses a great people instead. Moses would be the new Israel, the new Jacob. God promised to do this for Moses. He would just destroy the adulterous hearts and people of the Israelites and make out of Moses a new people. This could have made him proud. He would become now the father of many nations. And instead of allowing his pride to take over, he pleaded on behalf of the Israelites. And because of his plea, God heard him. And he spared the lives of all those who had sinned against him. For 40 years, loved ones, for 40 years, Moses put the needs of others before himself. And at the end of the day, he wasn't allowed into Canaan because of his own sin against God. But that was all right. He would still bring them to Canaan. He would still take care of God's people. He would still lead them. And then he would enter eternity, and his people could enter Canaan. Our second principle that we want to examine this morning is a humble heart is willing to serve. In verse 11 of our opening scripture, Paul writes, and he exhorts the believers in Rome and says, "Do not lag in diligence, but rather be fervent in spirit, serving the Lord." Then in verse 13, he adds, "Distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality." Now, both of these phrases have to do with serving, either serving God or serving our fellow man. In Matthew chapter 20, the mother of John and James comes to Jesus with a request. Does anybody know what she asked him? Yeah. That John and James could one day sit, one on the right and the other on the left hand of Jesus' throne in his eternal kingdom. Now, mothers always want the best for their children. We know that. But this was something that Jesus could not grant. He says actually that it wasn't even up to him to determine this, who sits at his right and left hand, because God the Father would determine this. And yet he took this opportunity to teach his disciples about humility. In verses 26 and 27, he says to his disciples, "Whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many." And this is where we see that verse from the beginning of this hour. Now, Jesus calls all of his followers to a life of service. He even refers to his death on the cross as an act of service done in love for mankind. Now, society, especially today, generally looks down on servants as holding a lowly position and an insignificant position and function in society. However, people forget that some of the highest possessions in the land here in the United States are referred to as servant positions. Now, think of the politicians who we vote into public office to serve the needs of the people. We refer to them as public servants. We refer to them as civil servants. In Canada, we refer to them as ministers. And I know some radio hosts, they refer to the politicians here in the United States also as ministers. But in Canada, that's exactly what their positions are called. They're Minister of Finance, Minister of Immigration. They're ministers. In Canada, the highest person, here we call them president, there they're called the Prime Minister, which means First Minister, which means servant of all. The greatest servant in the country is the First Minister. It doesn't matter whether we're in Canada or here in the United States, they are elected to serve the needs of all people in that country, no matter their social class, no matter what kind of background they have. They are public servants. And likewise, to be greatest in the kingdom of God, we need to be willing to serve others, and that requires humility. You want to be the greatest? Jesus says to John and James, then you be the slave. You be a slave to all, and then you will be great in my eyes, if you do it out of love. If you serve your fellow man because you love God and love your fellow man. How can we serve? What are some of your thoughts? How can we serve in our daily lives today? Very good. We can bring meals. That is something that I have been amazed by in this congregation. How meals are brought to people in need, and we receive them every now and then too, and we're so grateful for them. It's an act of love. It's an act of service. It's a great thing. What else? That's a wonderful thing to do, to take the elderly and those who are perhaps not comfortable anymore with driving or have maybe a language barrier that they can't overcome, to take them to the doctors and help them with that. That's a great act of service. Another example. That's a wonderful thing. When we open our homes and our hearts to those, especially on the fringes, there are some people that aren't invited very often. And do we have our eyes open for them and our ears for their needs and invite them to our homes? There are so many ways that we can serve. Helping out at church events like Vacation Bible School, visiting people that are ill. We can mentor younger Christians. I know, looking back in my life, there were Christians who took time for me. One pastor in Elmer, he actually arranged a mentorship program that we had no idea was happening. So we asked the older youth or the young married couples to take on one or two young people. And every couple of weeks, just take them out or her out for a coffee and just talk to them. And one older youth, he did this with myself. And I was so thankful. It blew my mind that this older youth would take time for me. And it really helped me in my walk with the Lord. That's an act of service. And there's fruit there. Opportunities for serving are endless. The problem is not everybody has a desire to serve. One author asks, are we willing to sacrificially serve others even if it involves hardships or difficulties? Those servants work hard. They don't usually receive recognition for what they do. Are we willing to serve others and not be upset when we don't receive appreciation or recognition for what we've done? If it goes unnoticed for so many years, are we okay with that because we know that in the end it's about glorifying God and helping our fellow brother and sister? A part of our Christian duty and service that we perhaps overlook at times is our responsibility to reach out to those who are on the fringes and often forgotten about. At the beginning of this hour, we read in Romans chapter 12, verse 16, be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. As Christians, we are to consider the needs of those who are overlooked and forgotten about. And one author writes this, often our pride shows itself in the choice of people with whom we choose to be around. We might prefer to associate with people who are wealthy, are popular, have interesting personalities, dress well, or have a good education. The people with whom we are willing to spend our time with are often an indication of what we think of ourselves, who we think we are, or who we would like to become. And there's truth in that too. And then he writes, on the other hand, a humble person makes an effort to talk to all kinds of people, regardless of how uncomfortable it may be, because a humble person is more concerned about others than he is about himself. Throughout our whole lives, society tells us it's not about what you do, it's about who you know. Who's heard that before? It's all about who you know. And we're told that if you want to advance in life and maybe at the workplace, then you need to hang out with the right people. You need to associate with the popular people, the rich people, the important people. But think of the people whom Jesus associated with. Who did Jesus take time for? For the poor and the sinners. In the first hour, we saw how Jesus took time for a very short man, Zacchaeus, and how his life was changed because Jesus took time for him. Nobody would go to his house. The Jews hated him for being a tax collector. And Scripture says he was filled with such great joy when Jesus came to his house. He was around former adulterers and adulteresses, thieves, sinners, tax collectors, all these people. And when the religious leaders became angry at him for spending his time with these people, Jesus says to them in Matthew 9, verse 12, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. They were too proud. These religious leaders were too proud to see their own need for a Savior. And so Jesus went to the people who saw their need for a Savior. And that's where he was. Loved ones, do we see the marginalized as our equals? Do we see those people that are on the fringes and that they have a soul that has an eternal worth and value? Their souls are just as valuable as ours. as just as precious in God's eyes as our own, as potential members of Christ's body, just like we are able to be today? If so, then reaching out to them should in reality be no different than reaching out to any other person. Remember that the word humble means showing that you do not think of yourself as better than other people. And as soon as we do, then we see whether or not we truly are humble in God's eyes. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 9:19, "For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all." And in verse 22, he adds, "I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some." Do we know of people who are on the fringes? People who are forgotten about, ignored, for whatever reason? Are we willing to reach out to them? Or is there a root of pride in our hearts that prevents us from serving? Because that's what's preventing us from serving in such situations. It's pride. It's pride. Paul became all things to all men. What was his reasoning? That he might, by all means, save some. Jesus, the Son of God, did the same. Are we ready to humbly serve in like manner? This morning we briefly examined two final principles on humility. The first principle was how a humble heart does not seek its own but gives preference to others. And our second principle, just as important, a humble heart is willing and ready to serve others and reach out to those who are overlooked and cast to the side, who are marginalized. Are we like our Master? Before I found salvation, I didn't consider myself to have much worth. To belong to a big family, the last of a big litter. And big families' kids are often overlooked because there are so many needs there. In schools, you're often overlooked because there's so many students. And so when you have that kind of a feeling, when somebody spends time with you, it means a lot. Loved ones, I wouldn't be here today if it had not been for those people. And it has to do with humility. Those who humbly look to the fringes for people in need and who are hurting. That's what Jesus wants us to do. But it requires humility to humbly serve our brother and sister, our fellow man, because we love God and we love them. May God help us. Amen.